Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar focused on CMMC Security Pitfalls. I'm Jack Ardrey, and I'll be moderating for you all today. This program is brought to you by Charles IT, CT's compliance experts. This webinar is being recorded, therefore all attendee microphones are muted for the duration of the session. At the conclusion of the webinar, all signed up attendees will receive an email with a copy of a presentation and the recording of the webinar. The webinar will begin with a presentation. Immediately following, we will host a question and answer session. You may submit questions via the Q&A button on your screen. We have a large audience, so our speaker may not get to all of your questions. He will follow up on the ones that he does not have the opportunity to address. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Foster Charles. Foster is our founder and CEO here at Charles IT and is a long-standing compliance expert. Foster founded Charles IT back in 2006 and has grown his skills and team drastically since then. He has an experienced background in helping businesses of all sizes prepare for their respective compliances. I will now turn the floor over to Foster.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Today we're going over CMMC, and most people want to know when they first talk to us about the pitfalls of CMMC, trying to become compliant, and how do we get there. So today, here's a quick agenda of what we're doing. Basically the CMMC background, what the heck it is, why does it exist, the levels that you can be in CMMC, and then the basic requirements to be compliant. We're going to spend most of our time is in the CMMC security pitfalls. That's a lot of the things that we are seeing that people, where they're making their mistakes and the things you probably should know. And then we'll have a little Q&A time. We'll probably spend 5 minutes answering questions. And then I'll do a couple quick closing thoughts. So first, right off the bat, I'll get right into it. What the heck is CMMC? So CMMC was started in 2019. The DoD put together this set of regulations to all government contractors. Anybody doing anything with the government should comply to CMMC. And basically what was going on was that everybody in the government contracting world, the major providers weren't getting hacked, but all these subs and all these other people were having security breaches. And that was getting a lot of secrets and things released. So it's a massive call and cry for everybody to get compliant with cybersecurity, so we don't have a lot of classified or technically CUI was controlled unclassified information get out into the world. And what controlled unclassified information really is all right, maybe the F-35 fighter design is a classified design, but the rotor of a blade in the engine for that is technically controlled unclassified information. You collect enough of this information, you can kind of piece together parts and pieces and enough information to be dangerous. So basically they wanted to control this unclassified information that was really going through a lot of the supply chain and manufacturing. So this applies to all the DoD contractors, whether you're making a paperclip for them or a new advanced security weapon system. So and it basically, they had a bunch of breaches that happened. People should have been complying to 800-171 or what's called DFARS and the clause of a lot of those contracts that you're signing. And people were self-assessing like, yes, I promise. But what they had is a couple high profile breaches and figured out that they were saying they were secure and really weren't. So CMMC was born, and CMMC is basically the jump between DFARS and 800-171, where people self-attest and say, hey, I promise I'm secure. To a third-party auditor coming in and verifying that they're secure. Similar to like a SOC 2 compliance. When people say they're SOC 2 compliant, I fill out all this information and a third party attests and promises, according to them, that they came in and verified that I was that compliant. And that's really what CMMC is all about. So there's right now, a little side note, a lot of drama going on with CMMC. People are like, hey, should we not do it because of the change of administration? Is it under attack? Is it actually going to be a thing? Don't do that. Take your head out of that thought process. A lot of people are like, no, I'll just wait and see what happens. But actually, the head of CMMC, I think yesterday said, I have a quote here. It says, We'll be finalizing any changes to CMMC very soon, and we'll be transmitting that to all of you. But I would just continue the way you're going until that time comes, because there's still going to be a need to have cybersecurity practices in place and then have them verified and validated in some way by a third party, end quote. So no matter what, still going to have the security practices in place, and those things have been in place forever. I don't expect those security practices to go down, because DFARS 800, 171, now CMMC, they're all very similar security practices. And really what they restated is that it has to be verified and validated by a third party. They have to validate it instead of people self-attesting. So what those changes are, we're going to find out, and technically very soon. What most people want to know is, okay, where are the different levels? What is this level thing? So really what you're looking at is there's 5 different levels of CMMC. The ones you really want to pay attention to are 1, 3, and 5. There's technically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, and 5 are the big ones that are going to be focused on release first, and people are going to go to it. So level 1 basically says I have basic cyber hygiene. I got antivirus on my computers. My computers are patched. They're not running like Windows 2000 or XP or something like that. Like it's not that bad, right? We want to make sure that we're running Windows 10, not Windows 7. So basic cyber hygiene stuff. Level 3 is good cyber hygiene, and good cyber hygiene is implementing all the things of these security practices. So that is advanced threat detection, that is external vulnerability testing, that's security awareness training, that's encryption, that's multi-factor authentication. That's what we would and the government considers good cyber hygiene. So and then level 4 and 5 is really focused on the most sensitive information, and that is advanced threat protection, they call, or persistent threat. And so what they're looking for are people that are being sneaky, making lateral movements in your network, and really you're taking it to a whole nother level. That is what very advanced security. So the big thing here, different levels of CMMC, most people are going to fall into 3 when they're coming into your contracts. If you're making paper clips, you got to have 1, you have to have some basic stuff. 3 is going to be for the majority of contractors producing something that might be classified, and level 5 is the part that you're working on is the classified part, like it's really classified. And we won't, 95% of the people out there are going to be level 3. So stick to that. The requirements to become CMMC compliant. So basically, the best way I can describe it is what you really need to do is be able to get to that level 3, a good managed cyber hygiene, and that means all the 800, 171 compliance, basically DFARS, those things that you should have been doing since like January of 2017. I want to make sure that people don't put this off. So like the big thing is that there's been a couple high-profile breaches. You heard the Kaseya hack that happened. That was a supply chain hack. And that made a ton of news, and it issued executive order, I think it's 1428, 14028, and basically that was following on and reinvigorating CMMC and why it's there and what it's done. That was put into place May 12th of this year, and basically he outlined, President Joe Biden outlined the requirements for logging, supply chain fixes, like basic good cyber hygiene, and goes back into DFARS and FARS, in particular the federal requirements, and making sure the whole federal government is there and pushing a lot of money and focus back into this. It caused the whole recent revamp that we've been seeing and talking about in CMMC. A lot of people are saying, hey, these contractors believe it's too expensive, that it's unreasonable terms, things like that, and it just reiterated the fact that the government is going to be requiring these things. The other thing, a requirement, time, lots of time. Don't kick this can down the road. Most prospects that we're talking to, and even some clients say, "Oh, I'll do this when I see it in writing," right? And I get that regulation, or it's in my contract, like then I'll actually comply to it, and that's a little dangerous. So the big thing that the CMMC is publicizing right now is that, oh, it takes about 6 months to get there. 6 months, if everything's perfectly aligned, you have good cyber hygiene right now, you have policies in place, and you just need to kind of go through it. And realistic, it's 8 to 12 months to really get CMMC certification for something like level 3. The important thing to note when people are trying to figure out, okay, when should I do this or not, think 8 to 12 months from when the contract that you might have won goes into effect. So as soon as the contract is awarded, you have to have the actual certification. So the contract goes into effect, you have to start delivering like you won it. They're like, okay, you have to be certified as of that date. So if you do the whole contract and then 6 months later you find out you're on the award, you are going to suddenly be in this rush and you probably fail. And even if you do it and you pass, the problem is you have to have all that information submitted to the board and get the passing grade by the time that happens. And there's probably going to be a relatively good backlog. So don't kick this can down the road. Don't wait to say, hey, I'll see it in writing. That's super common. That was like that with DFARS as well. So both the government and the accreditation body, CMMC accreditation body, socialize that 6-month runway to prepare. But because a large number of solicitations have yet to include, and the vast majority of government contractors are kicking the can down the road, they're taking the approach with like, I'll deal with it then. I understand that thought, but by the time you see it in solicitation, it's probably going to be too late for you. So, security pitfalls. CMMC, choosing the wrong level. Some people are like, oh, I just need 1 or 2. No, it will specifically be stated. A lot of people go for 5 for some reason. They're like, hey, I want to get this because we might go after other contracts. I don't recommend trying to do that. You'll drive yourself bonkers. Don't choose the wrong level. Level 1, basic cybersecurity hygiene. You can do that in 2-3 month sprint and get that. Level 3 is probably 8 to 12 month sprint. And level 5 is probably a 18 to 24 month sprint. It's advanced cyber hygiene. It has 15 additional practices on top of level 4, which is 20 additional on level 3. So level 3, for those of geeks and know the regulations really well, 800.171 is like 160 controls. The level 3 compliance adds 20 what they call delta controls, additions onto it that are adding for extra planning and information to it. So if you're DFARS compliant now and you're comfortable with that SSP and where you're at, you're probably you have to look at those 20 different controls. The last thing is choosing the wrong level. A lot of people are like, DFARS, CMMC, I have a DFARS clause, but doesn't mention anything about CMC. Like, what do I do? Which one do I need? The government, the accreditation body for CMMC, the board that puts and sets all these rules themselves has keep going down the DFARS path. 2 reasons. 1, most of the agreements and things currently still have DFARS 800.171 and those regulations and requirements. And what you're going to see is as CMMC ramps up over the next 5 years and being in all those solicitations and government contracts, you'll see the 800.171 DFARS kind of scale down, and you're going to have this crossroads probably in the next 2 or 3 years where you're going to see more of CMMC than DFARS. But really in the next 6 years, it will be scaling into more and more. DFARS, why the accreditation body says that is 1, only the people in the current contracts and things are trying to get certified. So even if you try to get certified, you're going to get put in the back of the line, and then your documentation might be out of date. And DFARS is way easier to get accredited for, and it so prepares you so much for CMMC level 3. So if you're going to go for 800.171 and DFARS and those regulations, go for that. Get certified in that, like be comfortable that you're there, and then the other 20 will be easy. That solid foundation of all those other controls will get you where you need to be. The other pitfall, CUI. Everybody talks about CUI. That's the controlled unclassified information, and there's FCI. It's not just about CUI. There's a couple other ones, but the biggest one that people completely forget about is the FCI. And so what that is the information that's basically generated from the contract. So technically it stands for Federal Contract Information, and it is the contract itself, the award documents, all that kind of information, and that stuff being transmitted through non-CMMC level 3 certified means is also a finding. So a lot of times people are like so focused on the CUI that they miss the other components to it, and those other things aren't being protected because they're really thinking about the plans, the drawings, and like information and communication once the contract's rolling. But even the rest of the contract and the federal contract information that gets along with it, and all the information you provide and generate for the government contract, and anything that's not publicly released classifies. So make sure that you're including FCI into your compliance checklists and think about that information. What the biggest gotcha that we see is that people say, oh, like one, figure out where the CUI is, how it rolls through your organization, how it's being transmitted, like that's a big part of the job. And then people totally miss the contract information, so the FCI. The other component, tech gotchas. So for the nerds that are on this, I see a bunch of IT people up there. So these are the tech gotchas, and even if you're not one of the geeks, don't tune out. These are relatively easy to understand gotchas and why they're gotchas. So I have the controls written out there. So I'll start with the first one, the 3.45, is review and update logged events. So people are like, oh, I'm logging all my events. I have a SIM. We watch and look and review all those. I'm good, check. Careful there. Most people implement that, but you need to reevaluate what's being logged. So the best thing you can do is most people implement that, but they don't regularly review the logging and what's being logged. So think of it from the government side or even from a business owner side, is that, okay, I set up this control to log all this information, and the business slowly develops and changes things. Maybe you get a new platform, maybe you move to GCC High Office 365, maybe we get a new server. And people don't think about, oh, I have to have logging there and there and there when those things get implemented. So you should, the best thing you can do is just add that meeting in as when you're doing your risk or what's being logged, and reevaluate what's being logged. So you have to log all the events, all those event logs and all those servers and things like that, all need to be in there. The second part into it, going and continuing with the logging, is that you have to collect the audit information and you have to centralize it. And you have to protect that information from unauthorized access, the modification. So somebody can't go do something malicious and then wipe the logs. So you have to really be thinking about, okay, who can actually see those logs, who has access to them to be able to modify or change them. And the other part is they have to be centralized, all in the same place, centralized. So a lot of times I see logging here, I got somebody reviewing that email here, I got somebody doing that. It's all going through emails, and somebody's like, yep, I'm reviewing them, but they need to be centralized so people can look at them in completion and see correlated events, that one log here and here, they have a correlation to them. So that's a big thing. Only certain people should be able to access those logs, who's doing what. I skipped through the separation of duties. So the big thing in separation of duties, so separation of duties of individuals to reduce the risk of malevolent activity without collusion. What the heck does that mean? Basically, that means is that you have to make sure that duties are separate enough that people can't, the person signing the checks, if you will, in a financial control and writing the checks can't be the same person. They want something similar to that. And this is the biggest control people miss all the time. The easiest way to do that, another control, you have to review all the users' access. And what I recommend is that you put into that review, when you're reviewing, okay, here's all the people and all the systems they have access to, you add a little checkbox or column in that meeting and saying, checking for separation of duties. Does this logically make sense? Does this person here, do they have any duties that we could potentially separate into another role? So just moving all of the bookkeeper, both signing the checks and writing the checks. Oh, I just hand this to this person and then I have a separation duty. So the easiest thing to do it in your user review of access and least privileged access, add a checkbox saying separation of duties. Who should be accessing what? The other part is manage asset inventory. So a lot of times people aren't documenting all their assets and controlling it and being aware of it. So focusing on discovering what your assets are: computers, phones, what operating systems, firmware levels, version numbers. The pitfall that it comes into is twofold. One, being prepared to actually do something about the assets, so actually having the information readily available when you need to go and look and consider. And two, when it comes time to be able to provide that to an auditor and what that is. If you don't have enough of the assets, the biggest thing is that auditor comes in or we come in and we're like, okay, give me the asset. And we just have every computer and every server and laptop. And I'm like, okay, what about phones? What about tablets? What about cameras? Like, are those cameras have the right firmware? They're not high vision, which is not allowed, or like things like that. Taking the time to actually inventory all those things and making sure you know what they are, version numbers, that having that ready to actually take action and have it be in the scope. Next one, and this is a big one, and if you've listened to my other webinars, I talk about this a lot, the cloud solutions, every time. The big gotchas in here is that people are implementing and doing something that isn't CMMC compliant or FedRAMP compliant. So boiling it down, if you're taking on a new vendor and they're going to be handling some CUI or FCI data, the number one question to ask are you FedRAMP moderate compliant? That's it. They have FedRAMP moderate compliant, means they're doing FIPS 140, like all this other stuff. But if they reach that compliance, then you can put that data there. But a lot of people are like, oh, I'm in Office 365, Microsoft's problem. You have to have GCC high for Office 365, or Datto backup is a super common backup that a lot of providers use. And Datto is not compliant. It's not currently compliant. Or we see a lot of Dropbox or Google Drive, or there's been just a massive push for work from home and just allowing people to work through how they send and move files around, that a lot of cloud is being pushed right now, and a lot of people are signing on for these extra services, and those things are just getting missed. So you got to make sure that the cloud providers you're using are actually compliant. What they're looking for is, and if you're not sure, is a well-described cloud customer responsibility matrix of what the cloud providers are, who they have, and what security compliance, and if they're FedRAMP, or if you have a provider, you have to enable certain things to make them compatible, and that is really should be there, and it should be reflected in your SSP, your policies, your procedures, and your plans. That all kind of reference each other. The other one, you don't have enough documentation. I'm going to spend a little time on here because by far it will reduce your auditing cost, compliance cost. It'll help you just get to be compatible as fast as possible. So having enough documentation is the biggest thing that we're usually working on. So the first biggest thing is not documenting or demonstrating any of the best practices. Like, auditors need to know all the processes and practices and plans that your company uses, and we need proof. Like, the second part is proof. Not documenting those things or demonstrating it, like disaster recovery. Have you shown that you can actually do that? Or do you actually have that document? And you're like, yeah, we just go to this offsite location. Like, it needs to be planned, have a plan and a policy that you're going to. So you're, and a lot of times those things flow down to your providers and other things. So like Charles IT, we can show you the proof of the cybersecurity hygiene that you're following. Like, here are the policies, here's the OS hardening guidelines that we use every time we provide you to a new computer. Like, things like that need to be planned and documented, and you as the government contractor should be asking for those things as your risk assessment, third-party risk assessment for new vendors. Like, what are your policies? What are you doing? So one of the main reasons we got SOC 2 Type 2 certified is that here's all our policies, here's a third party verifying that we have those policies and what all those things are. And we provide that all the time. The other big thing is no SSP. Like, please just have your SSP. Policies, procedures, and plans that embody and correlate with the SSP is the biggest thing that you need to do in documentation. Auditors are looking for, we're looking for, we need to prove, okay, you have all this stuff, now prove it. If you don't have one, like, you have to put it in place. If you don't even know what an SSP is, email me and I'll send you a template, foster@charlesit.com. I will just respond back to you. I can give you a blank template, and like, you can go and start filling those things out. And then the other part to it is don't get them confused. People confuse a policy, a procedure, and a plan all the time. They are separate things. A plan is what we're planning to do to achieve a current compliance and what we're actually going to action on. A policy is what people are following, like, hey, if you're going to use encryption, it has to be this standard. And a procedure is, okay, to implement this, these are the steps we should do. A policy should not have the steps, procedure should, but procedure shouldn't be talking about all the different possible encryptions that you have. Like, those things should not intermingle. So have an SSP and have it that they all are referring back to policies, the procedures and plans that you have. Which leads me to policies. So your policy aspect is you have to have policies. Policies are the biggest working issue we discover working with companies. They have none. Maybe they have them, but they're severely out of date and they made them like 10 years ago, or they're idealistic. Maybe they downloaded them offline. They're like, hey, this is our policy. This is what our incident response policy is. And then we read through it and we're like, you don't do any of this. You don't even have this software. Like, what is this? So don't just go and download something and implement it. Those things need to be, my recommendation is make them broad and wide enough that you can make changes in your organization and how it works without having to go and update your policy every single time you make any little change, but specific enough that you know the compliance is done. So encryption is great. FIPS-140, it's a requirement, or AES 256. Like, these are the standards for encryption. It's not saying, hey, we're using BitLocker. If you ever change that, you have to go back to and update all those things. Saying, no, these are the standards. It's generic and large enough, but it meets the compliance. So I don't care what you're using for encryption, as long as it's FIPS-140 or AES 256 or one of these things and using the right cryptography module. Like, those are the things that need to be in the policy, but it needs to be broad enough and not hyper specific. A lot of times we download, people download one and we're looking at these downloaded policies and we're like, what? Like, these things don't match up, or they're so hyper specific that you're never going to follow them in actual day-to-day business activities. So making sure they're not super idealistic. And the last one, lack of legally binding agreements. So the legally binding agreements, a lot of times we need to make sure that all your agreements have clearly specify CMMC or general cybersecurity framework like NIST CSF or something, and best practices mandatory for all of those vendors and people that you have. So you're making sure that liability starts and ends with them, and like making sure those are clear lines. So people are like, what the heck are you talking about? What agreements? Like the service level agreements you have maybe with your MSP or with a provider that requires you to do the business, like maybe your cloud managed ERP software, or teaming agreements or terms and conditions. Like, all those things need to be referencing all that, and a lot of times that's missing. So like, again, when we go back to like, hey, I won the award, I waited until this thing I saw it in writing. It's a big lift to go back to all of your vendors and all your people and go get these agreements re-signed. Maybe they don't want to re-sign them. Maybe to go do all these policies, to write the SSP, to do all these plans, and then act it out into a way that you can provide evidence, and not just doing it once, but being able to change the actual business process your business is following, so it's repeatable and obtainable. That's why it takes 8 to 12 months to do it. It's like, we can implement all the stuff in a couple of months, but we're going to really tick people off by making so much change, and then the business usually won't follow the proper appropriate practices. So those are the key things that you have to make sure that you're doing, and why it takes months and months to just retrain people, get people doing that. What are the cybersecurity best practices? It's the most common question that we get. These are all the things that an MSP like us, Charles IT, will go and do and implement. So things from dark web monitoring, which we're going through and making sure that your data and passwords aren't released online. Multi-factor authentication, big gotcha. And again, another pitfall that we find is in the 2FA. People enable 2FA to log into the email. You get the code to log into the ERP or other systems. The one that is actually required and you should be doing is that when you log into your computer, it should prompt for 2FA to verify who you are. And that's a common tech gotcha that people aren't implementing. Right? I have 2FA. We enable it all the time. I need it for the VPN. I need it to log in to like RDS or remote desktop. I need it to check my email. All yes, but you need it to log in the computer. So little side thing there. So that is the multi-factor authentication. It's getting that text message like logging into your bank, you get it. You should be doing that every time you log in your computer, email, something along those lines. Managed detection and response. This is a tad of logging, and it is advanced security protection beyond just antivirus. So behavior analysis. So again, like antivirus is looking at something and says, oh, I know what an application like BitTorrent or something that you wouldn't want on your work computer. And it's like, it's not a virus, it's good. But managed detection and response looks at the behavior of the user or the application, goes, huh, this thing is connecting to places in China and Russia and Israel, like probably shouldn't be going on, and that service would stop it. So it is one of the best things you can kind of put in place, and the royal pain in the butt for a hacker to get past. And we integrate it to a third-party SOC. So we document it all, and you have security analysts looking at it 365, 24/7. Next is security awareness training. A lot of people just don't have this. There's two things to it. One, I think the government actually will provide it to you for free if you need it, and you kind of go through the required stuff. It's a little clunky, a little bit of a pain. You got to do it manually, and it checks the box. We use a product called KnowBe4 that we really like, and basically it's training people, and we actively try to phish them. And if they fail that phish, we send them through security awareness training. Day one, when they get employed with you, we enroll them in the security awareness training. So you're not waiting that 6-month period before the next like all company security awareness training that you do in the conference room. You get them in that and enrolled right away, and you should be doing that at least annually. And it's the #1 way people get in is a phishing link, or it's just training your end users. If you're not going to spend if you're only going to spend $1 in any security product, I recommend the security awareness training. And the last, backup and disaster recovery. Most people, they think they have backup, or the backup isn't compatible. So if you're using like a Carbonite, or I would say the majority of backup software out there is not CMMC compliant, because of what's called FIPS 140-2, and the again, it's not going to a FedRAMP moderate cloud provider. That offsite needs to go to FedRAMP moderate. That's what you got to make sure that is going on. So any vendor you're bringing on, if it's not stored in your office, it has to be going to one of those. So that backup is super important. And a lot of times when we go and test those things, it works, but people don't realize, oh, it works. You have backup, spending $50 a month or $100 a month for it, and it takes 4 days to get restored. And most people think, oh, it would be an hour or two. That's why I pay backup. Not really. There's differences when you do it. Usually the dollars you're spending, the more dollars, the faster the recovery time, is a generic way of kind of looking at it. So I think with that, I can open it up probably for some questions and go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Foster, for a great presentation. You know, making sure you avoid those pitfalls during the CMC process is extremely important. But for now, it's time for the Q&A. And again, if you submitted a question and it is not answered during this time, Foster will work to follow up with you after the webinar is concluded. So if you have any more questions, feel free to get them in now, and Foster will reach out to you personally. So the first one we have here, Foster, is what would you say is an average cost for full CMMC compliance?
So this is an interesting topic right now, actually. So great question. I get asked it a lot. There was an interim final rule that was passed, and the Department of Defense stated that it expected businesses, specifically stated, expected businesses to cost to support and obtain a level 3 certification, and their expected cost was $51,095.20. So 51 grand. And what they also stated was that it didn't account for any of the cost to come into compliance with that model, or outside vendors like a cybersecurity consultant, an MSP, an attorney, like for the terms and conditions that you'd have to go out and get re-signed, or the time that your leadership team would go through and going through that assessment. and making sure that goes smoothly. So that's what they stated, and it's probably not that far off. Most of the time, engagement for us is anywhere, depending on the maturity level. Like if you have a fully fledged out POAM and SSP, you can probably get it done with us for 10, maybe 15 grand. If you have nothing and you're like, I didn't know the levels of CMMC, or I just been told that I need to do that, you don't have any policies in place, which is usually a general good marker, you're probably looking at a $15,000 to $25,000 engagement, just to kind of go through and do all that. And then you're going to have to pay a C3 PAO, which Charles IT is getting certified for, where we could actually be the auditor. Problem is that we're getting certified, so we know that we can guide our clients with confidence to what it takes to pass an audit. We don't intend to go and certify many organizations because we're there usually for the day-to-day. I cannot support you and help you get to compliance and be the person going for your passing you and like signing off on your attesting that you're CMMC level 3 certified. So short answer to the long answer I gave, about 52 grand is what the actual DoD stated that they expect the cost to become compliant, not including a MSP like Charles IT or a attorney or third-party vendors.
Great. Thank you for answering that for us. The next question we got here is, how long does the compliance process typically take?
Again, what the we were listening before, I had the CMMC board and like the government in general are basically saying that it takes 6 months. 6 months to kind of go through it and get there. They're also assuming you've been following all the rules for DFAR since like January 2017, so it shouldn't be a big deal for you. And 6 months would be if you've been following all those things. If you're following all those things, you have an incident response policy. You have the advanced threat protection. You have external vulnerability. You have your third-party vendor risk assessments going on annually. Most of the people that we're talking to aren't doing that. So more realistic, if you're really going for it and have focused and executive support on it, is 8 months. 12 months is pretty average, and that you have to have the funding and be ready to kind of roll with it. That's for a level 3 certification.
Great. And I believe you touched on this a bit in your first answer here in the Q&A, but how does Charles IT differ from a third-party auditor?
So a third-party auditor is the C3 PAO, which I swear is like a nod to Star Wars, but C3 PAO is basically the CMMC certified auditor, and they are coming and attesting in a third party that is just going through the information, making sure the evidence is there, and they are submitting it to the board for the final basically approval and issuing an award of the contract. So again, we are becoming certified to make sure that we can, in good confidence, and bring our clients to becoming certified. But that is a third-party independent, similar to SOC 2. For any of those who have an ISO or SOC 2 certification, you pay like 20 grand for a third party to come in and say, go through all the evidence, write up the report, and issue this confidential report saying, yep, he is, I attest to it, we swear, we promise. That's what C3 PAO is. When MSP, security consultant, MSSP, somebody who's helping you get to compliance, we are there holding your hand saying, okay, this is what we got. We should do this first, that second, that third. We're having those monthly meetings with you. We're guiding the organization, changing your business processes, implementing GCC High, implementing all the new security tools and things that you probably don't have, running or showing you how to run the first couple of meetings. Like, that is what we do. C3 PAO is not going to do that. They're there to figure out and audit you. Great,
and it looks like that's all the time we have for questions today. So thank you, Foster, for going through those and getting some answers to everybody. So before we conclude, I would like to give Foster the floor one last time for some final thoughts. Foster?
Sure. So who needs CMMC? Again, if you're doing anything with Department of Defense, government contractor, something along those lines, you should be looking at it. If you know what DFAR is, 800, 171, which is the NIST 800-171 compliances are, you probably need it. A lot of times they're like, oh, I'm doing this, not that. But I want to make sure it's very clear. A lot of people are trying to like weasel their way out of it, or it will still come. It will be a requirement. And if you don't have it at the time of the award, or the time the contract goes into effect, you've lost it. They move on to whoever was number 2. So making sure that you have that is super important. One of the things that it's our number 1 way of getting new clients, and I want to reiterate the fact of time. Everybody that we talk to is like, oh, I'll deal with that when we get that quote or anything. It takes time to do this, and everybody's like, no, we'll just sit out, we'll bang it out, we're really focused executive team, we can get this thing done. But it's really about changing the organization and the processes that you're going through. So we've seen this movie 100 times, like different clients that come in going for some certification, whether it's I need to go and get high trust certification or SOC 2, or I need a third-party HIPAA audit to make sure I have this for this contract that we're about to win. I need CMMC, otherwise I lose this multi-million-dollar contract. Again, we've seen the movie, we know how it ends, we know exactly what to do, what to implement first, what to do next. It takes time. So if anything, make sure that you're taking that time. And that's exactly how we can help. We can accelerate that process because we know what to do first, second, and third, instead of you're doing it for the first time. We've just done it a ton. So, and then costs, like if you have any questions, email me directly. Again, foster@charlesit.com. My email's up on the screen there. I'm more than happy to help. I'll give you a tremendous amount of time for free, just guiding you through it, because most of the time people just need a few hours of advice and push and direction to really save themselves 50 hours down the road. And I'm more than happy to help out. I'll let you know when you're kind of like abusing it a little, but I'll let you go pretty far of getting some free advice. I'm more than happy to help out going through that. And again, we're here to help you and implement those security things. The last part is that why you should bring in a technology vendor that is focused in compliance or CMMC is if you try to do it yourself, you're implementing usually 4 to 8 different new security programs, and you're doing them relatively rapid fire. One of the big things an MSSP or MSP like us do is that we've worked over years to build a stack of technology that don't clobber the heck out of each other. And so if you're going down this road yourself and you're implementing, okay, I have internal vulnerability scanning, I have advanced threat protection or like MDR or EDR solution, I have antivirus, I have my phishing stuff that's sending fake emails that's supposed to be there, but my spam filter keeps catching it, and I have a new spam filter. Like all those things tend to clobber each other, and it's the best way to reach out and say, hey, I'm looking at EDR solutions, like can you point me in the right direction? I can tell you the 5 top providers, the pluses, the negatives, which one to go to, and that's the best way to help. And that honestly, that's probably one of the best things I can do for free for a lot of people, is be able to go kind of get through all that.
Great. Thank you again, Foster, for a great presentation and for taking the time to answer some questions from our audience. We also want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. For the latest happenings for Charles IT, be sure to stay up with our social media accounts. We also have our in-person cybersecurity event coming up on the 23rd. So if anyone is interested in that, please reach out to us. We would be more than happy to have you join us. And that officially concludes today's webinar. So we hope you all have a great rest of your day and week, and stay safe.
Perfect. Thanks everybody for joining.